we start. My name is Molly Mowry. I am with the Community Wildfire Planning Center, which is a nonprofit organization. We're actually based out of Littleton, so a couple hours east. But we've been working with Eagle County and VBR for 8 years, maybe at this point. It's been a really fantastic journey. So it's exciting to do this every year, and I also get to learn about all the exciting activities going on in Eagle County these days. So that's my intro. My role at CWPC is as executive director. We were really fortunate in starting our nonprofit with the support and help from the Vail Board of Realtors in Eagle County when we launched it in 2017. So Mike is, I keep pointing to Mike. Mike is one of our board of directors. So we have a close connection with that. And we also work with communities around California and other Western states in addition to Colorado.
I'm Eric Lundgren. I'm the Community Mitigation Manager here in Eagle County, part of the Emergency Management Department. Around 3 departments over the years. But that comes with a lot of, roles and responsibilities related to the implementation of our wildfire regs as they apply to new construction, land use process, facilitation of the Eagle County Wildfire Collaborative, as well as the Building Ordinance Wildfire Collaborative, and the REALFire Program coordinator in Eagle County. And some of you have met with me in the field, or maybe you've met with Katie Jenkins or some of our other assessors, and I'm train and schedule and carefully review all of their reports and get them into the hands of you and your clients, as well as managing our customer assistance program, which can be used at an individual level to get to work on those action items we'll talk about later, and then looking at larger community level projects like some of the fuel breaks you see going in around the valley, or shipping projects or other things. Now.
My name is John Morse. I'm a local insurance broker in the Valley. I represent about 12 companies here. I've been doing it for about 10 years. And I'll just kind of talk about, kind of the industry changes over the last couple of years, the issues with underinsurance, which I'm sure everybody's heard of, the commercial fire and other issues. And what certain companies and what the industry as a whole is looking to do to mitigate the wildfire danger, as well as different scoring and what homeowners can do to help themselves get a better rate as well.
Can you all hear us okay without a microphone? We gave John a circle, by the way, because he's so special. He came back and we found it's really helpful to have an insurance perspective on this panel. So what we thought we'd cover today was going over the recent fire season, 2021's fire season into 2022. Reorienting ourselves to the term wildland urban interface. Who here has heard of the wildland urban interface? The WUI. Okay, and out of curiosity, how many of you, has anyone here attended a previous lunch and learn on a REALFire wildfire topic? Besides Mike and Mel. Okay, good. We will tackle, we'll make this about the Colorado wildfire context. So obviously there's a lot of fires that we can refer to, but we're really focused on not just Colorado, but Eagle counties in particular. So Eric will go into depth about, as he said, what the activities are locally that you should be aware of, and what some of the opportunities are that you should really be plugging into. And then John, as you mentioned, we'll talk about insurance considerations for mitigation. That has been a really big topic of conversation since the Marshall Fire. And then we'll have time at the end for questions, answers, discussion. However, if you do have a question as we're talking, or you want to clarify something, just raise your hand. This is not meant to be that formal, so we really want to make sure that if we say something, or if we use a term you don't know, if you just want to drill down into something, just let us know as we go forward. So here were our 2021 fire statistics. I thought this was interesting for me when I had this slide for 2020. We had almost the exact same number between 2020 and 2021 of total wildfires. It was like a less than 50 number difference from year to year. And that's actually pretty typical. We see about the same number of wildfires every year across the country. Most of them are started by people, less so are started by lightning. However, what fluctuates a lot is the total number of acres burned. So this year, or excuse me, in 2021, this past year was about 7 million. The previous year was 10 million for total acres. So that does change. However, total acres doesn't always equate to total destruction in terms of structures lost or lives lost. So you may hear that term, oh, it's a huge year, we had 10 million acres burned. It's safe to say it was probably a bad fire year, but it doesn't always mean every big fire equates to big losses. Last year's total of losses was 5,972 total structures. And when you hear total structures, that also means outbuildings, garages, sheds, anything that's classified as a structure. It doesn't always mean primary residences. This just shows a little bit more of that breakdown. So you can see of that 5,000 number, about 3,500 were actual residences that were destroyed last year from fire. Many more, there were many that were minor structures and some were commercial or mixed use residential. The most, I skipped, sorry, too far. The state with the most structures that was lost in total last year was California. So they had multiple bad fires. You probably heard of, you saw images on the news of Tahoe being evacuated through the Calder fire. The Dixie fire was another one. I think that was a 1 million acre fire. So altogether, California saw the most total structures lost last year, but Colorado had the most single devastating fire, the Marshall Fire. Is there anyone not familiar with the Marshall Fire at all? I would be surprised, but it's worth asking.
Why do they call it the Marshall Fire?
There was a little town of Marshall in unincorporated Boulder County where the actual fire started. The cause is still under investigation. I'm sure maybe most of us remember where we were when we first heard about it. I was landing in Denver. In fact, I was for the Christmas holiday visiting family, but where I live in Littleton, there have been fires all that whole week. So it's been very dry, lots of grass. On like C470, if you've ever traveled around the Front Range area, there have been a lot of grass fires. So in some ways, it unfortunately wasn't a surprise that there was another grass fire that day. It just so happened there were 100-mile-an-hour winds, and it took the right combination of conditions for that fire to do what it did in terms of damage. But my point is that across the Front Range that entire week, we could have actually seen a similar fire scenario. So this wasn't so unique in the sense that it only happened in one area. It's just that they weren't able to do what's called initial attack quick enough to get the fire to be suppressed. Mike?
I regretfully understand Wooly real well, but this is not in the Wooly.
We'll talk about that.
Okay, we're gonna
Yeah.
talk about that,
Yes.
because we need to quit thinking only of the Wooly wildfire.
We will actually talk about that. So
Okay,
you're
thank you.
leading right into my point. So this was the single most destructive fire last year and for Colorado in terms of structures lost. We actually, our organization, the Community Wildfire Planning Center, did some work at the beginning of the year with the town of Superior. And then there are many other groups, researchers, academic institutions, organizations that have been coming to the area to learn about some of the post-fire conditions. What we saw really tracked with what the science has already told us. And, I say this from my perspective, I use the word unfortunate because it's unfortunate that we're still repeating these lessons, but unfortunately, these are many of the same things that I saw when I went to the Waldo Canyon fire in 2012. After that, and we worked with a team to look at why did homes burn. We worked with the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety and the U.S. Forest Service and others. The NIST is another group. There's many groups that study these fires. Why do homes burn? How do they burn? And the Marshall Fire observations track very closely with everything we already see. So we know why things burn. We just continue to see this happening. This picture shows home-to-home ignition, which was one of the factors when one home starts to burn and carries larger embers to other homes, or the radiant heat is so close that homes side by side will burn. These are interesting pictures. Sometimes we blame decks for everything. In this case, the decks really melted because there was a heat source next to the deck. So this was built with materials that will resist embers landing on them for a much longer time. However, you can see that the house was so hot that it started to melt the deck on the left-hand side. And then on the right-hand side, there was actually a plastic trash bin, one of those blue recycle bins that had melted near this, and that's why the deck, there was a heat source next to it. So it was interesting that, again, we know materials that help prevent some of the ignitions, but it doesn't mean they still won't melt in some cases. However, in this case, this is in their downtown area. This was a good example of where embers did land on some wooden attachments on the top of the deck, and it started burning. The fire department caught it in time, but you can see some of the damage. And the point here is that even these smaller wooden attachments, wherever embers can land, they do make a structure more vulnerable if they're wooden. Fences were a big question that came up throughout the course of looking at the Marshall Fire, and were fences responsible. Near the open space, these fences they may have burned, but they weren't the reason on the left-hand side why homes were vulnerable to fire because of the type of fences. However, you can see fences like these stocking fences on the right-hand side that were closer to a house make homes much more vulnerable. And Eric will talk about a lot of these. I just want to give you some context for what we see, what we know. Another thing, actually, we did see this in Waldo Canyon, was these openings under garages where embers can land and go through. Depending on the condition of the weather strip or some of the other trim materials, these are also vulnerable. So, a lot of people think about what's my roof made out of, or what's in my gutters. Those are good things to think about, but it's everything in an ember storm. So we really like to capture these pictures to show people in the moment what's happening during a fire storm. This was near an open space, this multi-unit condo complex. What was interesting is open space took a lot of heat, no pun intended, for also being the source of how everything burned. But in reality, what you could see was the heavier vegetation right next to the home is what produced the heat that then made the home burn, and then the subsequent units that were affected. So, the grass itself was tall, but it really, you can mitigate the grass from open space much more easily than some of these larger juniper bushes. And then there were cases where vegetation was burned, but it didn't cause any home ignitions due to the way the landscaping was formed. So it's hard to tell a little bit with the lighting, but this is actually a little bit browner, these patches. This is where the fire came through and up. And there was suppression too. There was suppression throughout the whole neighborhood, but you can see, especially on the the right image, I don't know if you can tell, this was a little bush, and this is where an ember landed and burned the bush. But because the bush was surrounded by gravel and it was far enough away from the concrete porch, it didn't do any damage. So these are things we saw where not everything burns and causes destruction. So to Mike's point, one of the big wake ups, and in fact, my colleague Kelly and I have been for years trying to tell people, the WUI, the Wildland Urban Interface, isn't just the set spot that's a static place on a map where it's a big red blob and all you have to do is think about the Wildland Urban Interface is over here and I live over here, so I'm okay. Really, the Wildland Urban Interface is any developed area where, I'll read this out loud, but I'll paraphrase it for you. Any developed area where the conditions affecting the combustibility of natural and cultivated vegetation, which would be wildland fuels, landscaping, and structures or infrastructure, which we refer to as built fuels, homes, bridges, fences, anywhere where the conditions affect that combined combustibility of the natural environment and the built environment continue to allow for the spread of fire through this complex. What that means is, if you think about the transition from a wildland area, so there's nothing there, it's just wildlands, as you progressively move toward urbanized areas, there still are many conditions that exist that can carry fire across those urban areas and into those urban areas. Whether it's the direct flame contact or whether it's embers. It's really, I think that's what shook so many people up with the Marshall fires, thinking, wow, I don't live in a fire-prone area, I don't live in the mountains, I don't live in a forest. But in actual fact, all of the conditions clearly existed for fire to move from some of the more grassland areas and the of unincorporated Boulder into incorporated towns like Louisville and Superior. So the whole point of this is that there are many different types of development patterns that can be part of the WUI, the wildland urban interface. And they're subject to different types of emission, whether it's from flames, whether it's from embers, whether it's from home to home. I'm okay in the dark. It's whatever's easiest to see.
Ignore me.
At least I talk.
Okay. So there are a lot of different opportunities to reduce wildfire risk in the wildland urban interface. We can do that on buildings themselves, structures, again, any kind of structure, not just a house, the lots surrounding a structure, and then of course the neighborhood or subdivision or community level. Today, we're going to primarily focus on the building and the lot scales, which, if you remember this term, you'll get an extra bonus at the end of this course, the home ignition zone. So the home ignition zone is really the home and its surrounding areas. So think about these first two, sorry for the group over there, the first two pictures on the left, buildings and lots comprise the home ignition zone. And again, Eric will talk a little bit more about that too. That is the overview of thinking about risk. Of course, we're here today in the mountains, in a more forested area, but we really have to think about the wildland urban interface and the conditions that exist across the entire state in many cases. So I will turn it over to Eric to jump into what's happening more locally.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sure there's no more
Okay, so I was just telling Katie actually the other day how I used to get so excited by fire season. You know, it's my job, ready to do my fire thing, and now I just feel like here we go. And then I think about, is fire season even a term that we should be using anymore? Given that they're starting as soon as the snow comes off the ground, which is evident here in Eagle County in April, where we had the Duck Pond fire, you know, come close to burning 100 acres in the river corridor outside of Gypsum, and trigger all kinds of evacuations and really just push us into this thing in April. And then they're raging late into November and December. At Marshall Fire, December 30th. East Troublesome Fire blew up on October 22nd. Cameron Peak Fire, same thing. And they're all doing stuff that we used to say, you know, this term unprecedented is also a thing of miscasting, because it's just kind of like, well, what's next, right? So they never used to have 100,000 acres burned in a day, and Troublesome made that a possibility. Didn't have fires that crossed the Continental Divide, and then of course Troublesome and Cameron Peak did that, and then, you know, to Molly's point, I know I was sitting on the couch with COVID, watching the Marshall Fire play out while it was just puking snow here in Eagle County. In fact, my wife's cousin's house, who burned in the Marshall Fire, they had no idea. They were out skiing and they got back, and they looked at all these messages on my phone. So longer fire season, fire year, perhaps, for most parts of the state. I would say if there's not snow on the ground, it's in play. And then to the point Molly made, pushing into areas that we didn't historically look at. And maybe that's something that needs to change. So like it said, things jumped off to a bang here in Eagle County right away. And then, you know, we're at this end period. I would say we're well past it actually as of this week. This green up period in the mountains where we can kind of take a break. But things are drying out rapidly and quickly. Okay, we've got historic fires in New Mexico, and I made this slide on Friday, right? So I don't have historic fires in Arizona now too. But I think the trend across the Great Basin in the Southwest is this persistent historic biblical level drought, 12, some say worse than 1,200 years. So that's created just, it takes a while to bounce back from that kind of persistent drought. So yeah, we had an okay snowpack this year. Yeah, we had some late spring rains and snows, but it's just literally a drop in the bucket when we look at the way that the landscape has been affected, particularly the vegetated fuels, both living and dead. Next time you're up in a high elevation area and you see a dead log on the forest, kick around at it as it just blow away to like dust and ash almost as soon as you do, which is usually what happens to me. That just kind of shows that, it's going to take a while for those wildland fuels to bounce back from this. Things like grasses and brush and those types of fuels fluctuate more frequently, so they green up and we get some rain and everything's good, but then we get 4 or 5 days of hot, windy, dry like we just had, and we're back. So that's the trend that's already happening this year, and kind of seems to set up every year this time. It's that below normal precipitation, easy for me to say, with above normal temps. And then that's, in my mind, and this is, without going too down the rabbit hole into climate and what makes the wind blow in this part of the world. But given the changes in climate, it seems to me that we see more frequent wind events and more frequent extreme weather events. Those fires we all just mentioned, these troublesome Cameron Peak, Marshall, they had 100-mile-an-hour winds behind them at times. That's a game-changing kind of event. We had 50 to 60+ mile-an-hour winds in Eagle County yesterday, the day before, whatever that was. I can't keep track
Even
anymore.
today, it's like every day.
Every day, right? So that's what sets up, that's having that drying effect over time on the living and dead fuels. And then as our friends at the National Wildland Coordinating Group and the Predictive Services indicate here, we're set up across the Southwest through June for a high potential for large fires. My folksy way of looking at it is I always say, once all these little highway fires start kicking up, it's just a matter of weeks before the big ones start elsewhere. Particularly as we push towards the 4th of July and everybody comes and they bring their fires with them, since most of our fires are in the house. So.
Well, that was my question, Eric. It was perfect timing, because what constitutes a wildfire? Is it by size, or is those little fires that were just in Government Canyon, are they logged as wildfires that go into the numbers that Molly just showed?
Yeah, those are considered wildfires or wildland fires is the fire.
So they don't have to be a certain size, or?
It could just be an unwanted, so the Forest Service only classifies 2 types of fires, planned and unplanned. Like that, even better, right? So fires come in all shapes and sizes, right? We can have little ones that start and do a whole lot of damage. If you go to the REALFire webpage, we have on there a video where we just want to look it up called the Melody Lane Fire, which happened in Reno in the 2000s. And we see in that video a fire starting in the backyard of one home, one row house with an open space full of brush and grasses in between, and then another row of homes above it. And within a 7.5-minute response time by the fire district, which is pretty good, well, best you could hope for, 5 neighboring houses are involved as the fire spreads up the hillside, onto the decks, onto the shrubs, and into the homes, and then from house to house in that conflagration. So we've had fires in Colorado that have originated within a subdivision, burned completely through homes and built environment and landscaping, and then exited out into the wildland and been done. Because back to Molly's thing, the conditions for, I would just break it down even better, the conditions for combustion were available. There was heat fuel and oxygen readily available, whether that's my dead logs in the woods or my juniper hedge or the house that you live in. It's whether there's, the path of combustion is continuous, the path of fuels are continuous, then the fire keeps moving. And then to how do they name them, it's almost always a geographical thing. And we try very hard to be careful about naming things in a tourist-driven area like Vail, or we would say Wildfire. Remember, Beaver Creek was really upset when there was the Beaver Creek fire, which was actually in Wyoming. But so we try to pay attention to these kind of things, but law of unintended consequences. Good news, there's some prediction of monsoon moisture into this part of the world with relative confidence for the latter part of the summer, which again, like the green upgrade, but then what keeps happening in the late fall here every year, right? Everything dries out, the temps and the winds come up, and there's potential again, and so there's snow on the ground. So fire year means year-round opportunity for mitigation work and need to do mitigation work outside of wildfire preparedness month, which we're very pleased with how much everybody buckled down this year, but I have to say it's a lifestyle choice. But we'll get into that whole individual responsibility that we preach with, or we you know, what we more than just preach, we promote and encourage and facilitate at all levels with REALFire. But locally, we have a lot of things happening, both at the, you know, as we kind of start at the landscape level or at the big level and work downward. Those of you who pay attention, don't, you know, drive around Eagle County, you've probably seen a lot of things like this fuel break in Eagle Ranch go into place this summer, the last year. There's new ones in Bachelor's Gulch and Cordillera and Wild Ridge, and going into place in Singletree and Minturn. And this is kind of looking at where can we put in these kind of containment points where we can stop fires, catch fires, do what we can before they are rolling in and starting to impact a lot of homes. And then how do we coordinate that effort across the landscape so that when we have these monsters like Marshall or East Troublesome, or, you know, it's like, frame context for those of you that don't go to Great County very often, right? It's a 230,000 acre fire, which is like a quarter of the size of Eagle County. So that's a duck pond fire, starts in Gypsum in the morning and it's in East Vail by the next day. That's a reality of things that can happen and have happened in Colorado. So we need these large level areas that we can catch fires on the landscape or try to, you know, push them away before they get there. And then this one here is something that takes a lot of heat all the time because they get, you know, we don't say, please don't ever say controlled burn because it's just a misnomer. Fire, but we put fire on the landscape sometimes for a reason, and that is to you know, manage fuels in a natural sense. This is fire is needed in the ecosystem, and we never get to zero fire risk no matter what we do, no matter how many fuel breaks or home assessments or firefighters we hire. We never get to zero wildfire risk, but we can get to a manageable level or something that we can live with and become fire adapted to. And just like all these plants and animals, they have some level of adaptation to fire, and we want to capitalize on that with things like prescribed fire. Of course, right, you say the Sims fire in New Mexico was a prescribed fire that got away, and that, you know, so it was the Lower North Fork fire that does happen. And for my money, at least, and it's all our shared tax dollars, I'd rather have a bunch of people intending to do good have something that gets away from and then, you know, somebody with a cigarette butt or a campfire or a down power line because we didn't do the fuels treatment. If we're doing this mitigation work, then these results from planned and unplanned fires are less catastrophic. So we will continue to do prescribed fire here, and we hope that people realize that we do it in a very the safest way possible, but it is a tool in the toolbox. And it looks like I'm missing a slide or two about collaboration. Or right, okay. So shared responsibility exists from land managers, folks like me at the county level or at the fire district level, or your state people, or your federal partners like the BLM Forest Service, or everybody in between. We look at the big picture, and then at a community level, we begin to drill down more into what are things we can do in between these row of homes, or how can we look at this open space parcel, and so on. But ultimately, this WUI problem, or whatever new acronym, because we could say GUI too, right? Because we got the grassland urban interface. That's a new one that I kind of like, the GUI. This built fuel, vegetative fuel problem, right? So a big part of it is on private property. Those built fuels are all on private property. So the fire district, the county government, the federal government, state government, we can't come onto your private property and manage those fuels. We need your help, and we need this shared sense of responsibility, which was the birth of REALFire. Is how can we, one, communicate to people what they need to do, because you don't know what you don't know. And then And then how can we begin to point them in the right direction of making meaningful mitigation action? Then we'll get on a little bit to how we can facilitate that happening. So it's a voluntary program wherein, you know, we meet with people at your house, because that's the difference between wildfire and say a hurricane or a tornado, right? It's the scale of what's dictating that behavior. So wildfire behavior is dictated at a scale of feet. Marshall Fire, I think you showed some pictures, right? One side of the street, all gone. The other side of the street, completely there. On a micro level, back to that fuel triangle, like what are the available fuels? One home burns, one home doesn't. What it burns in between houses, it doesn't between houses. Like it's a scale of feet based on available fuels, which is a great thing because we can do something about it versus this massive storm that rolls in off the Gulf and takes out everything in its path. You're just kind of bracing for impact there. So we're doing more than bracing for impact. We're like changing the battlefield in advance by mitigating fuels and making the fire less able to consume the built fuel as context. So it's a voluntary thing, which I can't stress enough because I get calls all the time. Will you come do an assessment of my neighbor's property? Because I got some problems with what's going on over there. Like, no, I can't do that. I can't just go. That would be called trespassing. Also, an invasion of privacy. It's like, no, you can see everything from my yard. You just come and take the pictures of the fence. I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. This is, and I work in a regulatory arena too. And honestly, you know, there's limitations to having your stick, and it's valuable at times. But this is a CARE program, and we're trying to voluntarily work for people. Yeah, like
That, to me, that slide is very important because as you and Molly both know, the 2013 statewide letter would have mandated certain mitigations prior to anybody closing on a property. And guess who would have been responsible for assuring that it was mitigated to the structure that they were going to mandate? Realtors. Think of the liability of a bunch of crazy people like ourselves making those determinations. So REALFire was created to be a private, to be free, and to be local, not state documentation. So to me, those are three very important components for you to think of, because heaven forbid they would ever dust off that 57-page program from September of 13, and all of a sudden that came flying back up in everybody's face.
yes, it is. We want to have in the larger toolkit of mitigating fire risks, there's a place for regulatory approaches and a place for voluntary action. And this one is aimed at voluntary action. And particularly when we talk about new homeowners, of all the groups I work with, they are the most motivated people to do this work and my favorite to work with. So that's one of the reasons why we're like, yes, Realtors, go back.
Well, and just sorry to interrupt you.
No.
To build on Mike's point, I think the key, especially back in 2013 and still exists today, is that these parcel level assessments are the most accurate way to know exactly what's going on your property. So getting boots on the ground, getting the expertise of Eric or Katie really allows, instead of some kind of arbitrary, instead of a statewide map, that it has a purpose and is very useful for certain planning things. It's very difficult to translate down to a parcel level scale when you can't see, are there needles in the gutter? So that was just kind of a nuance to the state imposed recommendation versus the opportunity here to get on the ground.
Yeah, you know, there's no one size fits all approach. I think it's what we're looking for here. And we want as many options as possible for people. And some people, frankly, have to be told to do it. Others, frankly, don't care for that at all, and we'll get there for other needs. And so we're trying to poke at all of the reasons we can get voluntary action, and there's a lot of them. Yeah.
You have the ability to write the permit for, like, if there's a tree removal, to go like circumvent the town rules. I had one of the Wildland fire guys come out. But do you guys have the ability?
Would that have been in a specific town?
In Cascade Village, the
So
tree was
yeah.
too close, is it within 5 feet?
So in Vail, yes, you can do that. You can call my counterpart, Paul Cada, and there are different regulatory mechanisms in place, and they can make that happen. We can help, say, an example for, in like Bachelor Culture or at Beaver Creek, the design review board will waive deposits and streamline the process on tree removal if you're working with us on a litigation action, not just improving views. So I can't come and say in Bachelor Gulch, yeah, write down, cut this tree down right now, here's your permit, like they can in Vail, but I can give you this report and you can take it to the DRB and make things happen and not have to pay deposit fees and that kind of stuff. That's the best thing we can do there, but good, that was a good point, that when you're in the town, and we're working on town stuff with different things with, yeah, no, but we can help. Okay, so ultimately, Mike says it's an important slide. For me, it's an important slide because I'm like 20 pounds heavier in it, so I like to look at that. Reminder. So, what we're ultimately getting here is a well-prepared home ignition zone. Back to like Molly kind of teed this up a little bit. We know why homes burn. We know how to make them not burn. And we just have to connect the gap between that, you know, instilling that knowledge in the homeowner, like back to why we do this, education is the biggest part of it. And then giving them a good mitigative action that they can take that they can afford and make happen. And that isn't just usually a one thing. It could be a lot of little things that add up to a big difference, or it could be one big thing like changing your wood roof or enclosing your deck or replacing your siding. Those are in the ballpark too, and meaningful actions, but a lot of times just looking at the little stuff like, hey, why do you have firewood on your deck in July? That seems like a hazard. Or have you know, there's this open soffit, and this is like some old structures around here that you guys are probably trying to sell. You're like, I can put my hand from the outside of your house into your house. It's like, this is beyond just the fire issue. It's like, how much do you pay heating bills in Colorado in the wintertime? So kind of looking at places where embers might ignite in and around the structure, looking at the immediate area and beginning to formulate a plan. And that's back to what was the $1 million question, the HIZ, the new acronym of the day is the home ignition zone. As mentioned, this is a personalized report with a list of actions specific to your property so that, you know, why is that juniper shrub touching your deck a problem, or where should you have wood mulch versus not, and so on. And then that list, and then for some, we can work towards a certificate of achievement, which can be of value to a potential insurer or maintaining insurance, or maybe just for, you know, as a thing that you offer as a certified property as part of your marketing strategy for selling a home, or just to put it up on the wall and be like, yeah, that's my certificate. A lot of different reasons why, but that's we can work towards certificate of the home, which generally is achieved to help with insurance reasons. And John will get into that. We're focused on largely the exterior of the structure and the surrounding area. I love to check out nice interiors, but it's, you know, but fire's in there, we missed the mark somewhere. And we like to take a wall, you know, a roof down, walls out approach. So the most common thing people tell Katie and I is like, you know, I thought you were going to tell me to cut down this tree. You never said that, but you gave me 20 new things to think about in the house that I never considered. So it is very focused on the built environment and helping people see the forest for the trees, so to speak. But it is looking at, again, every place embers to trap, any place we can bring direct flame contact with heat sources near the structure, and then as well as that surrounding area, which is usually the stuff people have already thought about or think we're going to talk about. You know, looking at that horizontal arrangement of fuels on the ground, trees, shrubs, deck, house, spreading things around, looking at the vertical arrangement of stuff from what's burning at the surface level up into the canopy of trees, and how can we modify it so that we're not running a big hot fire right at a structure and that is ready for the onslaught of the embers, which, you know, is probably what takes most buildings in this urban interface context. So a lot of the common hazards we find out there, I've hit on a bunch of them, right? We've got, you know, trees like this hedgerow almost that form a wick back to the structure where we could keep the trees and maintain our privacy, but we could limp things up and keep fire from entering that canopy and making, breaking the chain of continuous fuels. Brush and firewood and other stuff underneath decks. This is a thing right now that many of you, maybe even your own properties, have seen, like particularly in this mid-valley area or in Vail, places that were all built and landscaping was planted in the 80s and 90s, and it was a much different climate then. And a lot of trees were planted, and they did really well for a while. And now there's a lot of trees there, and it's very dry, and they are not doing very well. And it's very expensive to water them, and people are like, "Oh, the hell with it." And then some trees, like aspens in particular, if you're in Aspen in Eagle County, you're probably struggling right now. There's just a lot of things that, like overcrowding and urban forestry stuff that can be achieved with also with fire mitigation. Personal property. I'm cluing in on how they've shoved all these old plants, and there's a Christmas tree back by their windows in their radon mitigation situation, venting, juniper. Everywhere I go, jump to juniper. Yeah,
Require it in here, that you have to have a certain amount of trees and stuff?
some places, absolutely. Some places, particularly, in some of those communities we just mentioned, Cordillera and the, Red Sky, that precious coast around it, there were sort of places, woodworking was required. Excessive landscaping was required. That's part of my regulatory thing. Just locking horns with one of those DRBs this week about this guy who literally wants to plant a forest on his property, 57 spruce trees in Cordillera Divide. On a hillside there's no trees. First of all, this is a problem from a water management standpoint. Yeah, you totally changed everything around this site. So that's back to the when is the stick important, when is the carrot valuable as well. But that's where a lot of places were fixing that problem. They required that wood roof. They required all this landscaping. It was done in that people like me in county and building departments and land use departments were saying, no, this PUD guideline, you have to have X amount of shrubs. So Cordillera used to fine you thousands of dollars to cut down a tree, or make you replace. Some places I've gone to this a lot, like every tree or shrub you have to cut down, you have to replace. I'm like, well, how can we ever get there? So those are the changes that are happening at a variety of different levels, and things that we can push on to. The owners are like, why are you making me plant all this juniper? Why can't I have this roof that I want if it's cheap and violated? That's a larger discussion, but one that's good to know. So you get your report, it calls out specific actions, which we've already talked about. You work towards this ultimate goal of having your house certified. And since we just did, and this is reflects the condition of the property on April 30th, 2017, because Katie can attest as we filmed the new REALFire PSA that I'm sad I didn't bring the show to you. We have to go out, but it's amazing. We went and stacked, we went and found a bunch of new wildfires hazards at my house, mostly related to the placement of my lawnmower and some scrap wood and other stuff. So it's not all trees, it's personal property, it changes. So back to this lifestyle decision. But oftentimes people ask, well, what do certified properties look like? And here are 4 of them. Lots of trees and vegetation, right? I mean, we're not talking about cutting down things like aspen. And in fact, this one in the lower left in Eagle Vail, part of the goal was pulling back the Douglas fir and creating this nice buffer of aspen and removing junipers and using perennial and annual flowers and creating hardscape fire-free 5-foot areas of rock and gravel and other things around the structures, wherein embers aren't causing damage in landing and stuff that could burn. Even here, right, we got a woody shrub next to a garage, but if you can see, it's all been rocked in, and that's that might not have been the best location for it, but there's some wiggle room in there, and we can do things with what's happening at the ground level and still maintain aesthetics and get away from some of the most common things. So I think what's really fun about REALFire is its growth over time. So we've been kind of hovering at and when I say properties, we do an awful lot of multifamily and townhome stuff, right? Wildcat Ridge townhomes is just counted as one. assessment, but how many buildings? It's like
We
6.
have 3 buildings and 10 units, and we were just awarded the $7,500 match.
Yeah. So those numbers aren't indicative of structures, but just properties, and a lot of them are multifamily stuff. But here we are midway through 2002, we've already seen almost a double or tripling of interest in the program. And a lot of that is fueled by just that kind of thing, is that we, not only are we gonna go out and help you talk about this kind of thing, but we offer cost share assistance, which at a community level, which is defined as more than 5 residences. I had to at some point draw a line, because we have a group of 2 homeowners who are like, well, there's 2 of us, we're a community, and well, fair. We each are get individual awards, but I had to kind of put a threshold there, so like our 10 units in Wildwood, around, that's community level, 2 neighbors in Homestead at White. We can also work towards larger programs like a chipping day work, like we do a lot with Bellyache Ridge right now. They're actively doing curbside chipping after a month of hauling it out to the street. And every year, I can't believe how much they bring out to the curb. It's impressive, and points to man, we need to be doing a lot of work in people's backyards. And we can look at other levels of stuff, and I'm going to quickly hinted at Katie Jenkins over here to my left for a minute and talk about how the Neighborhood Ambassador Program works a little bit. I don't know if this is where I really have the slide there.
That'll work. Hi everyone, my name is Katie Jenkins. I'm the Wildfire Mitigation Specialist with the county. They have chatted a little bit about me as being a real fire assessor, so I go out and I do these private home assessments. I've done quite a few already this year. Something that we've kind of realized is that we're missing a big piece of this puzzle, which is getting community members involved to the point where they are also sharing information with their neighbors. So we came up with a Neighborhood Ambassador Program, which is where we look at neighbors in communities to share information about these resources that we offer, as well as the programs. Cynthia Thrall over here is one of my ambassadors for Wildridge, and she helped put the program together. Do you have anything to say about the program at all?
I went to 50 to 60 houses in my neighborhood, and people were thanking for, they didn't, a lot of people just had no clue, and they certainly didn't know that it was a free program. They didn't even know about the program. They didn't know it was free. I told him I had 2 houses evaluated by Aaron, and he didn't tell me to take down the tree either. That was a 40-year, picking down my own. So I think it was really enlightening to a lot of people.
No promises, I'm not gonna make you take down a tree.
No, right, but I'm saying that's what people expect. is
Yeah,
You have
yeah.
to go and take down 50 trees.
Sometimes you do have to take out 6 trees.
So yeah,
Sometimes you get to a fire free 5-foot zone for say the Chateau of Beaver Creek, you have to take 200 trees just touching the building, just to get 5 feet.
it's a lot of fun. So yeah, anyways, if anyone is interested in the program, it is completely voluntary. Mostly I'm looking to you to spread awareness and preparedness stuff with your neighbors. So if you have a lot of people in your communities that you're in contact with, you might be a good ambassador. I have cards with me, so I'm probably gonna leave some behind if any of you would like to hold on.
So we want you guys out there just spreading the good word about REALFire. For those of you that want to dig in a little bit more, start working on some grants and projects, rallying the neighbors and stuff. We want you in the club and building little pockets of fire adoption in our community. And quickly before we hand it over to John here, we've got just so much going on right now. I was just talking about with Molly before she walked in, and like 4 or 5 different things that I want to hire her for. But we've got this new partnership between Eagle River Fire, Greater Eagle Fire, Gypsy Fire, and Eagle County called the Eagle Valley Wildland, which has been hugely beneficial in doing these landscape scale fuel reductions and adding more assessors to the REALFire cadre. So, a lot of times we're sending you Eagle Valley Wildland firefighters. We're doing a lot in Vail with the Vail Wildland crew. They're also doing REALFire assessments now, and that way they can specifically tie you into things like, hey, I can write a ticket, I can make this tree go away, have my crew come and get it next week kind of stuff. So back to we want the local guys and gals working with you specific to, these are the people that are gonna be coming out and protecting your house during a fire. Katie and I will be locked in the EOC somewhere doing sit reports, but that's a job that needs doing too. And then we've got what was formerly the Eagle Valley Wildfire Council, now a collaborative, which has been reborn, like the eagle that some people say is a phoenix in our logo. And is really coming out of the gate with great stuff. And of course, I've got another one in Roaring Fork Valley, which is of course the other Eagle County. That we're doing great things too. And that is a partnership, that is a tri-county thing with Pickton and Garfield. And it involves all of our stakeholders at different levels now. I just mentioned the Neighborhood Ambassador Program as a better fit for HOA reps and community level reps versus these collaborative groups, which are kind of more stakeholders with broader interests beyond just one neighborhood. But we want that there's a back and forth between the two. And then we're doing all kinds of cross-boundary public-private land work right now under what's called the Good Neighbor Authority, which I won't bore you with, but it's basically a vehicle wherein groups like the Colorado State Forest Service in Eagle County can begin to do work on BLM Forest Service land. And it's a neat thing that hasn't been available to us as much lately. And we're dipping our feet in the water with Good Neighbor Authority work on Belly Bridge currently. And I hope to see more and more of that happening as we look to, you know, like some of you, maybe if you live in Single Tree or Wild Ridge or Four-Year Valley stuff, you have like your deck and property line in the national forest. And it's like this imaginary line where nothing can ever happen without NEPA. So how can we make things easier? So there's a lot of partnerships and stuff happening at that bigger level. And I think we're moving the needle. So,
Excuse me, yeah, don't mean to interrupt, but beyond these programs and the funds that the county is helping to work on, seems to me there's a number of, Department of Natural Resources and other things from state levels that HOAs or metro districts can apply for supplementary funds to add to these funds. Do individual property mitigation. I think there are about 4 bills passed this year down Denver relative to things like that.
yeah, some you can't, some you can't. Like individual property owners and HOAs can apply for projects like the Wildland Risk or the Forest Restoration Wildland Risk Reduction Program. But you're not going to be able to do that without our help. Specifically, you need a letter of recommendation from somebody like me or Katie. So that's why we want to funnel that. If you have a project, if you have something, especially if it involves like to Wild Ridge and Single Tree working together on emergency egress and fuels reduction. Those are real grant worthy projects. I want to do a fuel break around 3 homes and Homestead, not going to ever happen. But that is an option. And there's also, there's just a bunch of funding from the infrastructure bill that has yet to hit. And when that does, you will see that look like pass-through money through the Forest Service and BLM to us and then out to you in a lot of these grants. So to my point, yes, through Neighborhood Ambassador, through Wildfire Collaborative and coordination, then we would love to help the community work on a grant proposal to the DNR or the BLM or whomever. But trying to just take that on yourself is not going to be a very big use of your time.
That's really why
Yeah.
I'm kind of bringing it up because I'm familiar with the Mountain Metro Realtor Group. I believe the number they got from almost $500,000 to work on access and egress down in the Jeffco Park, actually Jeffco Lake, and those areas down in there. And they are all way into it, but it's incremental to these kinds of programs on top of it.
Yeah, so we do a lot of projects of varying size and shape around the county, and almost all of them have started with kind of a foot in the door through like a real fire assessment. Almost always. So that spark plug who becomes the ambassador, who rallies the troops, who coordinates with the next group of ambassadors, and then it's like a shared project between 2 communities, thousands of homes and people, and then all of a sudden not only do the awards get bigger, then the granting authorities are like, this is the collaboration we need and want to award to, so.
Is that $2,500 deduction from the state, like your taxes? If you do, let's say $2,500 if you work on your yard, is that still in place that with receipts it can be tax deductible? Or
Correct. You can, wildfire mitigation action up to $2,500 a year can be a tax credit on your state income tax, and not just federal. And Mike certainly has info, and so do I on that. I talk to your CPA. If you do your own taxes, I'll give you somebody smarter than me to talk to.
There's info on the Colorado State Forest Service website
Yeah.
about it as well. So Colorado State Forest Service, if you Google that and wildfire mitigation, it'll take you to resources just for homeowners and residents, including them.
And, you know, there are all kinds of, there's money in the infrastructure bill that is tied to home hardening and home assessments and community wildfire protection planning and everything we just talked about. It just hasn't hit the ground yet. And we're all standing out of buckets, I promise you. And that will pass through into these kind of programs. So hopefully those grants stay at that level forever, or maybe they increase. So on that note, let's talk about, oh, you got another one. Sorry.
I mean, or just out of sheer sitting here and thinking when you're talking as realtors, when you're talking to buyers and sellers and you're looking at properties and talking to them. I just think it would be so helpful if there was like some official one pager that you could include in an email when, you know, you're having all these discussions with them about a million other things, whether it's buyer or seller about the house, but this conversation, I always try, you know, we were working with someone recently, I tried to say, you know, thought about cleaning up this landscape, and mainly because I just went through what I did with you most recently, so it was on very forefront of my mind. And they were like, well, what are you talking about? We live in Vail. It's never gonna burn through Vail. I mean, they didn't say those exact words, but you know, I mean, that was like the mindset, or,
Yeah.
oh, they're gonna turn on the snowmaking machines if something like that ever happened. Like, there seems to be this mindset from folks that are, and I'm not singling out second homeowners or out-of-state owners, but there seems to be a certain mindset from them of, this isn't gonna burn here, this is a resort, this is happy land, it doesn't happen here. So, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, I know a lot of us locals that live here and live it day in and day out, but trying to have a one pager that comes from an authority such as yourselves, that you could email.
We've got one in the back there.
So we,
Right?
yeah, I
We
don't know
do
if
have
Mel stepped out.
I mean,
No.
just
We have one in the
yeah.
back that's a paper copy, and maybe even
There's a
better
trifold
as
as well.
a,
I think as an electronic thing,
electronic?
because, you know, I mean, they're into
Yeah.
looking at documents
Yeah.
about everything else when they're making this major investment in their
Don't
life.
get me started about handouts. I think the electronic version we can get you.
But there is a home buyer and a home seller guide, and they're a trifold, but it's a one page, it can be electronic, you know, so.
And they're on what website?
DVR's
This
website
one.
and the REALFire website, which
Okay.
we'll show
Yeah.
at the end. We'll show resources page. But Mel and I have actually been working on just a quick update to the trifold, so it's being updated as we speak. And that would be I think that's what we're really looking for.
Well, yeah, because I think the 2 points you made, you know, having that they can have they could do a certificate, that could be used like as like a marketing thing, or like, hey, this house is certified this. Or like Mike just brought up and Cynthia referenced the $2,500 deduction. You know, I mean, just bulleting some of those things to some of these people, I think would help motivate them a little bit more to see that this is the carrot. Here's the volunteer program.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, getting me or Katie or Hunter there or any of the team on their property is when we're gonna lay all that out there for them, but to have, like, we just need to get, it sounds like for Mel and everybody, we need to make sure that everybody knows that that tool is out there. And then real quick, because you talked about the ski resorts thing, the Caldor fire was a gigantic wake-up call for Vail resorts, at least, in regards to snow gun use and ski runs, as containment lines and stuff, but none of that happened. And there was massive dampening, lots of heat damage to lifts and infrastructure. I mean, Sierra Tahoe is a mess because of that fire. It's snow guns. They're often under construction and shut down during the summertime too. It's a thing they've hung their hat on for a long time, and when it actually came to pass, in Tahoe, none of it, that's reality check for them, and they're like, okay, this isn't gonna work.
Plus, who wants to go down a first ski run?
I think it'd be good, I mean, good powder tucked in, I will, you guys don't, I'll let you know.
That's our girlfriend.
We should just take one more
Yeah.
question.
One more, and then, yeah, I think it's,
I was just saying, I think it's a great point, especially for realtors, boards, and ways to like reach out and touch our clients. So if you did that one page electronic, say, hey, by the way, I looked at this, how are you doing? And just like maybe start a conversation.
yes, absolutely, we will, for follow-up, for
Well, just the
the
way
team
you
here.
pitch it to us to spread the word.
Yeah.
That's a good opportunity.
I think it's the changing and how we get this stuff out, right? We've boxes of flyers, but really people want it electronically attached to every email kind of stuff. And then Mike's gonna come in, I'm gonna get down so you can't.
Just before John starts, what you're talking about, he's gonna exemplify. Remember, insurability is one of the contingencies on every contract we write. So you need to be aware of what's available to people. If we're gonna sell 1,300 to 1,500 homes, every one of those buyers needs to know about the insurability clauses and whatnot, and what we make available to them. We're the only ones who go face to face with every new client that buys a property in this county. So take advantage of it. It's a tool for you.
And I'll just say one more thing about Eric. We actually had him come to our HOA and do a assessment of that with very minimal, changes that we had to implement or that he recommended. In addition to that, we sent that out to all the homeowners in the community, and they were very receptive, very thankful that the board was taking steps to try to mitigate that beforehand. And some stuff like, mulch in the courtyard, things like that, that again, you can't really force somebody to change without, rewrite declarations and stuff. Other homeowners have already started to try to mitigate that, to take actions into their own hands. So I definitely recommend, reaching out to Eric, from an HOA or from a home standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, Eric mentioned a number of different HOAs about it. Some of those, as an example, Single Tree probably sends out 30 or 40 emails a year to all their homeowners on Wildfire and whatnot. So people are aware, they just need to be jobbed about it, is really what it is.
Yep. Yeah, and when he sends the report with, pictures of certain action items, and some people will be like, oh, wow, that's my courtyard, I should probably, handle that. So that definitely, kind of helped a lot too. But again, I'm John Morse. I'm a local insurance broker, represent about 10 or 12 companies in the area. And I'm just here to talk about just kind of the overall, insurance trends in Colorado. Wildfire obviously is probably #1 top of mind in Colorado. It used to be hail, and then, wildfire was a close second, but that definitely overtook that this past December. What mitigation steps can help? And that's just important just because every insurance company is looking at it differently as far as what are your binding limits? How far are they willing to go into a brush fire? What the scores are. So it's really going to help you as a realtor to kind of coach even your sellers as, hey, this will really help if we can lower the score. This is going to present the buyers with a lot more options and kind of get that sale to go through. And then important coverages to consider, just kind of educating your buyers as far as, what they really want to look at. The underinsurance issue is, everybody I'm sure has read about with the Marshall Fire, just COVID, a perfect storm that happened. And then just kind of the claims process, a quick overview on that you can just help, coaching people through if they did reach out to you for that. But the first thing is, we kind of touched on this already, but just the home ignition checklist, and just the different zones. But certain things that people kind of tend to miss are, cleaning the roofs and gutters, as I think Molly and Eric mentioned, pine needles, all that type of stuff. Replace or repairing shingles, a lot of people brush over that one, especially on older roofs. If you're missing a shingle or if it's curved up and it never gets in there, I mean, that's an ignition point. Once that goes, it's, very, very hard to stop without a, extremely quick fire response. Then just reducing the embers that could pass through the vents. The vents, the eaves, you know, in ours in particular, you know, the sockets that go into the roof. The quick fix was you just, you know, put the 1/8 inch or smaller metal screening in there. And in addition to the fire, that helps, you know, you don't have rodents or other types of hazards that you obviously don't want in your home insurance. And then repair, replace the window screens, any broken windows, again, if there's little gaps in there and the embers can get in, and it's, you know, a windstorm as well, that's just gonna fire it right up. Below patios, below decks, if you have like kind of a step onto your front door and there's a gap on either side, or even a gap right below the step that goes under, that's a prime area, just because, again, embers blow in there. You're not even gonna know it until the flame's already kind of kicked up and kicked off. And then just move any flammable material. Eric's touched on that, you know, no firewood on the balconies. That's kind of the big kicker all over the valley. Especially if you have the second story condo, you just see it stacked up in East Vail. If you burn through it in the winter, great, but come, you know, March or April, let's get that out of there. Keep it tidy. This was kind of the policy declarations page for the plant in Singletree. And just to touch on the easy stuff, I mean, the number one thing, and we'll go over that, is you really want to work or coach your buyers to work with a local agent who knows the cost of building locally, and then just the cost to rebuild per square foot. The biggest thing here is the, you know, coverage A, the dwelling amount. That's where if a lot of people who went online and just got a quote from somebody in Florida or, you know, Indiana, it's going to cost a heck of a lot less to pull a house out there. So they were insuring all these houses down in Marshall Fire for much less per square foot than what it was going to cost to build. So you really want to double check that, especially if they're buying the house with the appraisal report. There's, you know, the appraiser has a total estimate cost new if they went with the cost approach, and that I always use that as a second or third point of reference to make sure that they are properly insured. And then next to that, it says expanded replacement costs. That's a big thing these days. By law, you have to have at least 20% in Colorado. But some of the companies I represent go all the way up to 100% expanded. And then there's a handful now that actually do guaranteed replacement costs. Meaning whatever that number is, they guarantee they'll replace your house. Which, so coverage A, the dwelling, but it says like with expanded replacement costs. On the, like lower on the declarations page, there'll be a box that tells you exactly like the percentage, 20, 30, 50, 100. And then like Nationwide, for instance, is one of the companies I represent. They have guaranteed replacement costs, which, you know, it's kind of, then you're just, you know, you don't even need to worry at all, whether it's this year, next year. They guarantee that they're going to rebuild the house.
Go over that, building ordinance.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And then the building ordinance law, basically what that is if the house is built in, say, let's say it's in East Vail, was built in the 80s. Since then, they've passed a bunch of new building ordinances. And for the Marshall Fire, the big thing was they passed a lot of like going green initiatives. You have to have, you know, Tesla charger in the garage. The ordinance law part covers all of the additional laws to bring that house up to code for this year. And that starts, if you add it, it starts at 10%. I usually at least bump it up to 25%, just depending on what, and it's 10% of the dwelling amount. So if it's $100,000 in the dwelling, you get $10,000 extra to bring it up to code. Or 25,000. So I always recommend bumping that to 25% these days, just because of all the additional things. I mean, we were just talking beforehand, you know, Superior passed a bunch of, it has to be a lot more fire resistant materials, which obviously costs a little bit more to rebuild your house. You really want to put yourself in a position, if it was to burn down, you're not really stressing to pull funds together to rebuild the house. You just, you know, you definitely want to rebuild it with the most, you know, fire resistant decks and siding and all that stuff. And again, that's just, if you're going online and getting a policy from, or a call center in another state, they're not thinking about that stuff. So they'll just give you the minimum, because they'll give you the cheapest price so that you hopefully buy the policy and maybe never have to use it.
John, sorry, I just want to clarify, the Superior didn't pass any additional fire resistant requirements since, people, they didn't have anything in place and they still don't, but they did have more recent international building codes which had higher quality materials or a sprinkler requirement.
Yeah,
Interior.
exactly. Yeah, and that's the big thing I heard. A lot of people they ended up removing that for people having to rebuild, but the energy efficient portion of it, the Tesla in the garage, they ended up Superior, and I think Lafayette just did, or they're about to remove that, just to kind of take the burden off of some of the people who had to rebuild, just because they didn't have that in their policy, and that would have cost them another, $50,000 to make themselves whole.
Well, the Marshall Fire was a real eye-opener. I was at a function this past weekend where there were 4 people, 4 different homeowners. 3 of the 4 are grossly underinsured. They don't know what they're going to do, quite frankly, because some of them were as low as 50% of replacement costs. That's a big deal. And that we can't stress enough when we're talking with our clients. Replacement costs, even after we've sold to them, every year or so, they should review their policies. And all these people admitted, we just got our insurance, and we haven't looked at it since we got our insurance. So that probably those 3 families may or may not be able to rebuild.
Yeah.
Something we could explain about how some insurance companies, you can take the money for your house and use them out, some can't.
Yeah, and it also depends on the mortgage, but some insurance companies have a endorsement on the policy where they'll say, like this house, for instance, $637,000. We'll pay you that, and you can walk away and buy a new house, or you can use that to rebuild. Other insurance companies will require you to rebuild it and then have to sell the house after it's rebuilt as well. So that's real important. I mean, a lot of people who don't have a mortgage it applies to. Most often than not, if you do, you'll have to rebuild it and then sell it anyway, just because you're gonna have to cover the cost of it. But yeah, no, I'll touch on the other stuff that Mike was talking about in other slides, but you definitely have to revisit it. It's kind of sad. I was talking to somebody the other day, right after the Marshall fire. I was reaching out to clients, but also had so many people call me like, hey, let's bump up our dwelling, let's do this. And it obviously costs more money. And I had somebody a week or 2 ago call about it. I said, yeah, and I was like, I recommend we add 200,000 to this. He's like, all right, well, let me think about it. It's already kind of gone from, top of people's minds to, let's let this ride. So we shall see. But the other important part on here is the loss of use coverage deed, which a lot of people kind of glance over. And again, that it depends on the company. In this particular policy, this policy level, it was called the actual loss sustained, meaning if the house burned down, they're going to pay to rent a comparable place, any additional living expenses until we get you back into your house. Whether it takes a year, 2 years, however long it takes. A lot of the less expensive policies on the market, especially if you have a condo policy, most of those just have a dollar amount associated with that. And especially up here with the cost of rent, it's grossly low. I mean, you might cover yourself for a year. And then the last thing you want to be is in a position where your house just burned down, you already have all this stress, and now you're like, crap, I need to pay my mortgage, and I need to pay to rent my family house until we get you back into that house. So.
Price of the policies is all over the board.
Oh yeah.
I just had someone had 3 estimates.
Yep.
3,000, 6,000, and 14,000.
Yep. Yeah, I usually.
Is that the same criteria? Well, yeah.
Usually it
I
can be
wasn't
close.
involved, so I can still.
Yeah, and actually in the next slide, I kind of go over that, but different companies have different pricing models and have different variables and algorithms for each state, let alone each county and each, section of the county. If I'm quoting somebody with say Safeco in Vail Village, and then somebody in Safeco in Cordillera, is totally different pricing, whereas travelers might be a little bit less expensive in Cordillera, a little bit more in Vail, or, vice versa. So I always kind of shoot my clients, hey, here's a little snippet of the, 6 top ones, and then I dialed it in even more. Here's your kind of 2 best options. Here's why you have a couple different options. And then kind of let them take it from that. And then this basically, we've talked about a couple of them already, but these are the underinsurance issues. They just went online without the full knowledge. The people like Mike was talking about, we're extremely underinsured, usually at least in the home 5 to 10 years, never reviewed their insurance. Another thing on the declarations page, certain policies have what's called inflation protection, meaning every year it's going to go up anywhere from 3, it used to be from 3 to 5%. Now it's Liberty took it up to 20% this year. It really depends on how closely they're watching that. But if you bought it 10, 15 years ago and you don't have that coverage, that house is just sitting at the same exact replacement cost since then. And unless you're an insurance agent, insurance is usually out of sight, out of mind. You're paying your premium and you think you're fully covered. The third thing, especially with the Marshall, was the perfect storm. I mean, COVID supply issues, labor shortages, the increase in wood, that year, all that stuff kind of played into effect where people who even bought a year ago, if they didn't have that additional expanded replacement cost, were underinsured as well. So that's another thing to have. And then the fourth item I just wanted to point out is if you have clients who are, who fell into that bucket, who were underinsured, there's a lot of kind of charitable type things, like the Colorado Associated of Realtors had, I believe it was up to $3,000 per home. FEMA had some stuff. There's a bunch of other, they can reach out to a lot of other places for help. And usually there's, in the Marshall Fire, for instance, whenever there's a huge catastrophic event, they'll have what's called like an insurance bill for each insurance company's there. FEMA's usually there, DORA's there. And they can kind of point them in direction. So here's how you can get a little bit more help to rebuild right then and there. Tips, we obviously already said the local market. We also touched on the different insurance carriers in different parts of the country or state have different rates. So even if they're using one, like a State Farm, for instance, who only has that company, just encourage them to get, 2 or 3 other quotes just to make sure that it's still, competitive and also has good coverage. And then also we reach out to all our clients every 12 to 18 months, just to touch base, to see if they've renovated a kitchen, if they finished their basement, anything like that, but also just to make sure that they're properly covered, and if there is a fire, that they're not going to fall behind. And then the fourth one, we also touched on the guaranteed replacement costs, which a lot of people it costs obviously a good bit more, but then you don't need to worry about the dwelling coverage that much. And then finally, the claims process. I don't want to spend too much time they're not going to be calling you guys too much as far as that goes. But the main important one here is actually on the bottom one. Once it's a total loss, the insurance company has to pay government check for 30% of their personal property immediately, which can help just as far as if you were evacuated and you had everything in your car, you're going to need to buy your kids' clothing and refurnish a couple things for your rental home. So that 30% can definitely kick into that quite a bit more. And then the other one is the fourth one down. There's 2 ways to find a place to rent. You can either reach out to somebody, find a local home to rent, or the insurance companies have networks set up to where they can actually say, hey, we found you this place on 123 Main Street. We can get you in there, and then you don't even need to worry about paying the rent. Whereas if you sign a lease, then you basically sign a lease, cut the check every month, and then they'll reimburse you for that rent every month going forward. But yeah, other than that, that's about all I have for insurance. unless anybody had any other questions.
Does a fireworks certificate have any impact on a policy?
Yeah, so that actually, going forward, it used to not, I mean, even 3 years ago it didn't, but now, as a broker, you kind of get a bat a lot more. Like I said, they kind of lowered your lining limits down, and then you need to call the underwriters and kind of present the case, as far as why this house is worthy, you know, why they're willing to do it. I'm working on another property in Single Tree now, the dwelling amount's about 2 million. And I had to submit that, show them that they've done all this work, talk about how they're working on putting fire breaks in. And all that goes into play for them to actually offer a rate. But just having that certificate can lower the brush fire score, which.
You're asking about Firewise recognized community, correct?
No, I'm asking about a real certificate. This happened to me, but this was years ago. I
Like
had
the
a
one that Eric
Firewise
got for his
certificate,
house?
And it meant nothing to any.
Yeah, so years ago that it definitely, it didn't.
So it's changes.
Oh, yeah, they're definitely looking at a lot closer. You know, this homeowner has taken the time to, you know, mitigate the risks. But yeah, now it'll lower the brush fire score down a little bit. And it depends on the company. Some companies are a little bit slower to react. There's a couple that I have that's still a no is a no versus, if I submit the certificate, now they're like, okay, yeah, let's, you know, we can offer them a rate. So that definitely is changing, and it does help.
It depends on who's your provider.
This was years ago, when it was first started in 2005, when we first started the program.
So they usually, at that time, they would say like a letter from a fire chief or something
But
like
it
that.
meant nothing to them at all.
It's usually about maintaining insurance. There's no way, I mean, like what we talked about there is the only way you can really achieve it on a reduction in premiums. But the certificate generally does not make a difference there, unless that's a very recent thing. I think it's gonna be provider specific. Right?
Yeah, it's provider specific.
It's hard to say.
But yeah, it used to not matter at all. But now it can be the difference between a yes or no, we will insure it. And then if they do, the brush fire score basically, once that lowers, that'll say yes, then it can also lower your premium a little bit. Just based on where that score comes in.
There's a national program called Firewise as well, that's run by the National Fire Protection Association, and essentially Firewise is a neighborhood level program, so it's neighbors working together, they commit to one day. It's a very positive recognition program for neighbors working together. However, it doesn't get usually down to the level of specificity that a real fire assessment would. But through that program, which you may have heard of, some certain insurance providers like USAA have worked with Firewise, and I think it's like a 5% discount off of their premium. Although I've also heard anecdotal stories of people that have been in a Firewise community with USAA and they didn't get the discount and then they got dropped. So I think, well, honestly, and I hope this is okay to say, John, I think, you know, especially we see a lot of trends in California where it's so hard to predict coverage or costs, even with a lot of mitigation, because it is so carrier dependent and risk dependent.
Yeah, it's definitely carrier dependent, and you know, same thing. And I've had a couple clients in Boulder, kind of some of the canyons who did a lot of mitigation, but also redid their house with the kind of fireproof materials, and that will make a difference. But I think I'd say the next year, you're going to hear a lot more about the insurance companies asking a lot more questions about the mitigation work, which will help be able to keep you know, insuring homes in areas like this.
USAA used to, with a certificate, give a discount. Used to, I said.
That was a miscommunication between us and them. I had an uncomfortable conversation, and they said no.
Well, yeah, they recognized it though.
They will recognize it, but no
They-
discount. That's right. Just wanted to make sure that caveat was there. We can keep your insurance with the certificate, but we're not going to get you a discount unless this brush score piece,
And
which we
insure-
have done, but
They'll
that's,
look at it for insurability,
yeah.
because as we know, Summit County a few years ago had a very difficult time getting insurance over there in certain areas because of the flammability in the forest. So who knows what's going to happen around the country and the state and whatnot with all the wildfire losses that the insurance companies.
Yeah, hopefully California provides a model, because there you can have a parcel specific mitigated thing like a real fire certificate. Absolutely do all the things that we're talking about, but it's not here yet.
Well, and also doesn't California have a mandated statewide program relative to mitigation that obviously hasn't proven to be real successful in mitigating?
They have multiple requirements. One of them is a dispensable space inspection on every property that CAL FIRE or CAL FIRE responsible departments would inspect. So they deal with the landscaping, and then they have a statewide building code that has a chapter specifically for the wildland urban interface requirements. So, I mean, definitely what we see in California is the gold standard for having a baseline that's this much higher than everyone else in the West. We're trying to deal with the wildfire problem that they see. And that, I mean, in addition to many outreach education programs, so it's not just regulatory. I'm going to just switch to the next slide, and then we can kind of open it up for all full questions. Thank you so much. So these are just a few of the websites. There's a million, but we pick out a couple of the top ones. One is, Eric, you didn't talk about it a lot, but I put the Eagle County Emergency Management website for notifications. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that for just a second.
Yes, so we know on all of these fires, we talked about that notifications are always an issue, and the best one that we can get you is the opt-in service, the EC Alert. So if you haven't signed up for EC Alert, please do ecalert.org, and that was, you know, how we'll get in touch with you. The most information, then there, you know, are different levels of ways we reach people. The Amber Alert iPod style thing, which just goes to cell towers and hits anything that's hitting it, and then, you know, sheriff's deputies at your door. But we'd like you to know about all of this well in advance. Even just, you know, the situational awareness that comes with getting red flag warnings every single day is a good indicator that it's time to start. It's getting real. So sign up for notifications for this thing. That's the thing we always talk about in every Bill fire assessment.
And then the BBR website, of course, that's where you can sign up for REALFire assessment. You can also download some of the materials that we pointed out. So the updated electronic versions will be available imminently. I would say the next 2 weeks. So look for that. And they're not that different from the ones up there now. They're just a little refreshed, like they have more current info on the fire districts and things like that, and contact information. And then, of course, the REALFire website. So realfire.net. You can also sign up for assessment there, as well as get some kind of general FAQs, look through some of our resources. It's a fairly simple website to navigate, so I will continue to, you know, link to the Eagle County resources.
So where you could put in, you know, how many family members are there, and you got a pet, and just
Community Connect. Thank you, Cynthia. That's another layer of going beyond and notifying the fire and the emergency providers of what you are and what you are all about. So then you can begin to enter information about specific to your property. Like I have, you know, latchkey kids, or 2 dogs and a cat, or my mother lives with me and she is in a wheelchair. You can begin to put in some property specific type information, and that goes into a database that dispatch has. And that's helpful in a number of emergency situations. So,
you can't even add, I can't add a picture of my dog. I think there's.
yeah, I put in my dog,
Yeah.
and then there's low tech things like the stickers on the door, you know, pets and cats.
Is it,
Boom, get dogs first, and then we'll go online.
is it Community Connect just Eagle County, or?
It's a thing that's through the fire district. You could go to
Okay.
either or Eagle Valley Wildland. So, you know, Eagle River Fire or Greater Eagle Fire, either of their home pages, they're just so
Great.
I don't
And
have
aren't
that
you-
URL memorized, I'm sorry.
Aren't you supposed to have something where you can tell them how to get your garage code or something? How to
That's the thing, you
access?
can enter into Community Connect. There's all that kind of stuff. You decide. I wouldn't necessarily open my garage and leave it open in an evacuation situation, circle back to all the stuff we just talked about. But yeah, you could provide that kind of like, I need to get this thing out of the house, here's the garage, but that can all be entered into it. Gate codes, they're good like that too. I put in information about my solar panels, just to remind them there's a shut off at the street. So they're worried about getting electrocuted, which they are.
It's like if you got a stroke or-
So did anyone else have any other general questions before we get to comment from Mike? Any other just general program questions? Mike, go for it.
I'd like you to maybe expand upon REALFire a little bit and let people know that Elk Creek, Genesee, Evergreen, soon to be Carbondale, and maybe even the Western Regional, that REALFire can be a major factor for the state of Colorado. The geography of utilizing the program.
Yeah, so that's a great point. There are other similar programs that we've been doing across the state as well as in Washington State. These parcel level assessments, they're not called REALFire, but it's the same technology, the same science, the same mitigation. For example, Mike's referring to Elk Creek Fire Protection District, which is primarily in Jefferson County. They have had an amazing group of local volunteers at the Fire Protection District who have really elevated their wildfire prepared program. So that's how they're working with the Fire Protection District and residents. They also have a huge insurability problem. If you've ever been through Evergreen or Conifer, you'll see why. So they, I think it really gives residents a way to engage. It comes back to this is a measurable risk reduction. So there's a lot of great outreach programs, a lot of great educational materials people can do, but the real difference with a program like REALFire or Wildfire Prepared or even Boulder County's Wildfire Partners program is you can see the starting point, there's a clear intervention of expertise, and then there's a finish, or I shouldn't say finish, but there's a point in which you have an inspection and you go from point A to B. Then, of course, there's maintenance, which we didn't really talk about, but that's another key factor in terms of the program success, is making sure people don't just do this one time, but as you said, it's a lifestyle. So we hope, and I think it's still yet to be seen, to what extent the state will continue or support these programs. Right now, it's been really grassroots. There's been a lot of interest because there's such a need, especially because of insurance. But we really hope that the state, we hope that the state will perhaps play more of a role in supporting these and increasing the capacity and the ability to do that across the state.
It was an interesting side. I drove through Genesee last weekend, and the Genesee Fire Department, which is predominantly a volunteer fire department, they had stands at many of the intersections throughout the development. Meet your local fireman and call him about an assessment, which I thought was quite unique and pretty aggressive that they were doing that up there. Plus, you could see where assessments had been done. They had stacks of wood that had been trimmed out of areas and whatnot. And it was the next day they were coming through to pick that up and whatnot. So it's a very proactive program. And I'll be really eager to see what Carl Oliver does over at Carbondale. Western Region.
Yes, we hope, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Carbondale isn't formalized as a program yet.
Yeah, he's been following for 2 months. He wants one.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I think Mel stepped out again, but definitely our thanks to BTR for hosting us. This is always a pleasure for us to get to talk about wildfire. You can tell we're all passionate about it.